And may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You know, the great Sabbath day is, something that we should be looking forward to all week because of the understanding that the separation that Yahweh, the distinguishing mark that Yahweh puts on us, has everything to do with this, with the keeping of the Sabbath. And you know, this class is the kickstart of the Sabbath. It's the first meeting that we have on the Sabbath day. And, you know, I encourage everybody to take full advantage to show Yahweh your participation in the events that He lays out for you here at His house. Because it's very important. You know, these are the things that we're being judged upon, and these are the things that will indeed protect us and qualify us for the things that we're trying to attain. We're going to be starting in chapter 13 on page 155. And this is the 14th book of Israel, part 1. Yes, 14th, part 1. We're in chapter 13. And that's found on page 155. It's an interesting sermon here because it's very well tied in with current events. But it says that the title is, "The Leaders of the Kings of the Earth Are Connected with All Sickness, Disease, Global Warming, and Wars." And of course, if you've got your December version of the edition, not version, your December edition of the prophetic word, not prophetic word, newsletter. I'm going to get it right. Right there on the very first page, you know, Pastor describes who the kings of the earth are. And of course, we should already know this because it's been in other previous publications. But a lot of times, if we don't stop to define the words that we're reading and understand them, they're just, you know, we read over them and we don't actually think about them and take them into consideration. But, you know, in this newsletter, you know, Pastor shows that the word kings means religions. So the Pope is a leader of the kings of the earth. The kings means religions. Remember that because it's very important for you to be able to understand other prophecies that are soon to come. In verse 2 of this sermon, he says, "Now the things that this world is getting itself into, it's horrible. And I want to show you what we're doing. You might, if you have a Facebook, you can get that off of Facebook. And he's showing you a picture on the monitor of Yisrayl Hawkins with Malik Obama. And of course, if you remember this the title of this caption, the article that went out was Yisrayl Hawkins and Malik Obama meet at spring conference on peace concerning rebuilding the temple and future unity between religions, and it was a huge success. Now that's a lot of words, but the future unity between religions, you know, this is the very thing that the Catholic Church is trying to, present to the world right now as if they have this solution here, that they're going to unite all these kings or religious leaders with her. But I always am in awe of how far ahead Yahweh is of everything. But there can be no unity between anybody without the laws that bring unity. So you can't do away with the laws and say that we're going to have unity now. We're all going to get along because we're going to accept each other's differences. We're going to accept each other's sins, is what they're really saying. But I think this is interesting. That what the title here, that there was future unity between religions, and it was a huge success. And of course, that the picture was over here by the temple model. And this did get out quite a bit. I remember I was working, my employer was out of San Antonio when this took place. And when I went back to work, he had actually asked me, you know, he said, "Did you get to meet the president's brother?" You know? So wow, that was quick, you know, because we were there at the feast, and it was like as I was going back, he had already heard of the information. So, these things that they get out a lot more than we give it credit for sometimes. You know, there are a lot of people watching in secret as we speak. But turning the page to 156, in verse 6, he talks about the problems with the tap water, cocaine, other drugs being in the tap water. We see even in Michigan now, they got lead in the tap water, and they just can't seem to keep the water supply clean. But remember, that was part of the commission for mankind, was to guard and keep the food supply. And you could see how dangerous that is when you live in a world where you can't even get clean drinking water. This is a very serious situation, that's taking place in the world right now. Also in verse 7, he's talking about the nightmare bacteria. And of course, these things also are growing worse and worse. Now, in verse 8, he says, I was reading about some congressmen and some senators that wanted to push through now some special projects that, they had a big backing on, and people were really behind these things, but it contradicted some. It would hurt some of the business coming to the Catholic Church. And this is so often the case when people are running for office. The first thing that they do, if they don't want that person in there, as Malachi Martin said, they use psychology. Now, these are the greatest psychologists on the face of the earth. They're brilliant with this stuff. How they can, if you just look at the deception in the world today, and how do you get all these people to not even know that the Sabbath day is the seventh day of the week, and that Sunday is the first day of the week? Think of the work that went behind that in order to get people to forget Yahweh like they have, right? But these psychologists, that's I remember pastors always said that's what they study. That's what the priests in Rome study. They study psychology, and of course they have many agents in different areas at work at this, and they can actually make it out to where righteousness looks evil and where evil looks righteousness, and it's very subtle. I remember a long time ago, I spoke about a particular word called casuistry, and if you're familiar with that word, it's a way of falsely applying a reasoning by which something that sounds right to make it, it's intentional, but it's something that they're practiced. It's a word that's even, if you look it up with the Jesuits, it's actually associated with the Jesuits. They're experts in this practice. And of course, you can actually see that being practiced today, but they don't tell outright lies, Pastor says, but they use psychology leading you to believe that this person did so-and-so. And of course, you see this in news reportings where things are said, and, you don't have to tell the truth to make it sound like you're telling the truth. They can say things and no fact check, ran, If you've ever paid attention to any of the articles that have come out about the House of Yahweh, you've definitely seen this, and you sit there scratching your head. Did they just say that? That they make these outrageous claims, but they'll say things. Well, it was reported that. So, they're not actually saying it's a fact, but they're saying that it was reported that. Well, by who? Oh, this guy who's crazy over here, he reported it, and that's often the case. Well, that's how they do it. But when people watch the news, they're not watching it through eyes that they're saying, I bet they're lying to me right now. I bet that news reporter's telling me just an absolute lie right now. People go to watch the news to become informed. And this is, one of the ways in which they do it. They've got many ways. They're not just there, they're everywhere. And they've got control over these things. And that's what we have to be on guard of. Before you accept anything as truth, you have to consider the source. Because there's only one source that you can go back and say, okay, I believe that source. That source is the truth. Of course, it's the pillar and ground of the truth. It's the House of Yahweh. And that's what the House of Yahweh is. In the same newsletter, if I could find it real quick. Yeah, it was on page 3 of this December newsletter. It says that, Yahweh, the Creator, put mankind on earth for the purpose of training him to believe Yahweh and to trust his advice and warnings of future activities. You know, you were created for this purpose. And of course, this takes some doing to gain this trust, to build this trust. But after so many times and after, seeing Yahweh's law at work and seeing the prophecies come to pass, you would then fall into the category of becoming a fool if you did not believe that the rest of the prophecies were going to come to pass. We have to put our full trust in Yahweh, and this is what it's all about. But the world would like for you to trust in them. They would like for you to trust in their pharmacists. They would like for you to trust, in their politicians. They're right at the brink of solving every problem. Whereas they haven't solved any yet. But, they're always pretending like, hey, if you elect me, this is going to be done, and then, everything's going to be great, and there'll be no more anything, right? Well, after a while, you become foolish to believe anything that they say. They're all full of lies, speaking lies, and some of them intentional, some of them unintentional. Remember that, as the title of the sermon is that the leaders of the kings of the earth are connected with the sickness, disease, global warming, and wars. We oftentimes put the blame on the ones making the mistake and overlook the fact that they were trained to make those mistakes. We have to be able to decipher those things in the house of Yahweh and to be on guard and to not be deceived, because deception is growing worse and worse. In verse 10, Pastor talks about these Vatican agents, more or less being everywhere. He says, but the lies that are brought forth, as Malachi Martin said, in the propaganda against these people to run the country the way they want to run the country. Now, listen to me. The Pope, the Vatican that sits on the 7 hills, you can't imagine how far-fetched this thing is. Yes, it sits on 7 hills, but they have thousands and thousands of active people in the United States. And they have prominent positions in the United States, in the universities, in the entertainment industry, in the news industries, in the developing industries. All the big, positions. We definitely know about the Supreme Court. They're just about fill the entire Supreme Court. As a matter of fact, they do. But in verse 12, he talks about the atmosphere being messed up and the sickness that is all over this world today. And then in verse 13, he says, but it's not just happening by accident. It's being caused by the leader of the kings of the earth. It's being caused. And the reason I say that now, and how do they get involved in this sickness and disease? Well, pharmaceuticals. That's more precious than oil to them. A precious commodity that never ends. Yes, pharmaceuticals. There was a great report I heard this week. It was actually, I think it was at one of those TED Talks that they released, but it was in a news article. A man, very well, I think he was a professor at Caltech. He was talking about the health benefits of fasting and why the pharmaceutical companies don't want you to know that. And I thought that was great that he was actually coming out with some of these things that pastors told us, for 30 years now or better. But it is great to see, when these things are being echoed throughout the world here, or repeated anyway. But he says, well, pharmaceuticals, that's more precious than oil to them. And, of course, the money that they drain from the governments, wanting them to back researchers and trying to find a cure that maybe they already have, I mean, they created the disease, so they know what to do to stop it. But these things are not taking place by accident, he says. And, of course, that's what Yahweh says. And that's where our overseer gets this information from. In verse 16, he says, I'm sincere about this when I say that right there is coming from the Vatican. And he was talking about sickness, but this world was not meant to be sick. The way that Yahweh created it for mankind and told Adam to guard and keep it healthy. It was very healthy, and even after they started bringing in sin, it took a while for the sin to start having an effect. But it did. And it cut the lifespan down from about 1,500 years to about 70 years. And you think about that. Think about people today and how, they think if they live past 80, they've done some great and awesome thing. Think about 1,500 years. And of course, Pastor says in this very verse, he says, I won't be pleased until it's forever. And that's what we're after here in the House of Yahweh. We're not looking to be around for 70 or 80 years or 90 or even 100. If it's not forever, we don't want it. Remember? Praise Yahweh. So this Yahweh's plan is forever, and we are part of that plan, and we can be part of that plan. But Yahweh requires some action on our part, we really need to be putting this into action. In verse 17, he talks about the Alzheimer's disease and how it's increasing. But in verse 18, he says, now something else now that they try to push these things off into making you think that they're caused by something that they're not. They've always been talking about Alzheimer's. Remember, it was supposed to be caused from drinking out of a can or something like that. Well, he says, believe me, and he says, believe the Scriptures. The Scriptures tell you what's causing this stuff, and they tell you who are the leaders of this stuff. Now, and now they're doing this, of course, with the carbon emissions now, and with the greenhouse gases and the ozone, and now that they've come to this agreement, I'm sure that the world's just going to be fixed now. Well, no, not at all. It's a false application of reasoning, and that's what it's all about. But he says the fact that they're filling their pockets full of money, and this is what it's always about. Every solution that they bring is meant to bring in money. That's their solution, that they take your money, and you get to smile and make you think like you've done something great about it. But the big profits that are floating back to the Vatican, that's pretty much shows you who or where or who's in charge of it. Yesterday, I almost laughed, and I thought what an idiot we would take to believe this. And he was talking about a survey that they ran about breast cancer, and they were trying to make it seem like that obesity was linked to breast cancer. And of course, he was laughing and said, "Well, what about the skinny ones? How do they get it then?" and of course, well, we didn't test them. Nobody knows. That's a mystery. But, it's just ways of getting more people to get involved in this healthcare system, which is set up to deceive and to take people's money. And that is according to the Scriptures. And of course, at the same time, brings horrible things to a person's health. In verse 21, he says, well, this is the leader of the kings of the earth that brings forth this evil. It brings forth this evil world that we're living in right now. And it's not going to stop until, and Yahweh says until, okay? And he gives you an until. And there's a few places in the Scriptures where you can find that word until. And I'm just going to give you one right now. It's in Revelation 17:17. But remember those little words like that, because Yahweh shows you that this won't go on forever and that there's a cutoff point. And you have to have your mind geared towards this event because, this has very much to do with us, and it's coming rather quickly. And it's, yeah, praise Yahweh for that. It is something that we need to be working towards. We go over in the Peaceful Solution talking about goals and having purpose. All these things, they're not just meant for us to be able to read in a book and to teach someone else. They're meant for us to apply and to live it so that we could teach somebody else. Because if we don't practice it, we won't be there as teachers. And that's the great thing about the kingdom of Yahweh. It's not a kingdom of hypocrites. It's not a kingdom where, the ones who are doing the teaching are taking bribes and causing, sicknesses and all these things like what we see in the world today. It's a total opposite of that. But he says, until, and of course, that's what we're basing our hopes on, 100%, and we know that. In fact, Yahweh even shows where he would interfere. He actually gives the year. and I should be able to bring that out if I don't miss any more services, bring it out by Pentecost. Well, maybe so. Maybe so. I think so. Yahweh is always, everything that the witness Israel teaches us, it's something that is forever. And that you can go back years later and look at it and marvel at the insight and the wisdom and how Yahweh was behind it. And we look at all the different events, and some of them that were, mentioned during last services. Some of these great events that have taken place in the House of Yahweh, it's just, to me, it's incredible to see how Yahweh's hand was behind all these things and how he's always been supportive of this work, and how he's always been behind his servant Yisrael. It's not like, it's not like Yisrael Hawkins has ever lied to us at all. No, he's been very obedient in bringing forth the things that Yahweh wanted him to bring forth. And that, we're all going to see that very clear before this is all said and done. You're going to marvel at how accurate everything that man has taught us is. I see it more and more with that Yisrael Says program. That has got to be the most, if you're not taking advantage of that, I think you're not making use of your time, because you can look for any particular topic there and get the full picture of it, like almost instantly. And there could be topics that you already think that you know about, and you go back and you read it, and it's like, what? and you get this clear picture of everything that pastor's been bringing. But you can see through it, or at least I've been able, to see, and I think everybody can see it, that the amount of work that it takes to bring out a particular topic couldn't all be done at one time. And you see why Yahweh had this work in advance to lay this foundation down, because there's not time right now for pastor to bring out all these topics. But there is time now for us to go back and research any topic. And it could be done really quickly. There's never been a time in history where we could research a topic like this quickly. Okay, so Yahweh has given us a big boost at the end here. And he says, look at this. If you're bad at studying, don't worry about it. I've got a tool that can take the worst studier and turn him into a scholar if he could just read for a little bit. And not a scholar of your own information, but a scholar of truth. And that's what the House of Yahweh was established to teach, is the truth. This is, like I said, it's the pillar and ground of the truth. Like Yahweh said, this is the pillar and ground of the truth. So please take advantage of that, because our time is short and we need to be redeeming this time. In verse 23, he goes on to talk about the classes that we have on the Sabbath day, right? And this is a big part of keeping the Sabbath day. Like, we mentioned at the beginning of class. This is what we come here for. This is what we come to Yahweh's house for, is to learn. And we need to be involved in the classes that he provides for us in order to accomplish this. And Pastor talks about this, and even in some of the training, hands-on training of this simple way of life that Yahweh's offered to mankind. Some of those skills are actually taught here in the house of Yahweh. Well, going on to verse 25, we see now that their goal is to depopulate the earth. And this is what Malachi Martin said about what Mary is going to do, and actually showed forth the plans of the Catholic Church. And he said that Mary is going to make war with all those who will not accept her. Now, this still includes a lot of people in the world. And of course, they use this psychology that we were talking about earlier to do this. If you're not on guard, if you're not, guarding your mind, if you're not educated in the laws of peace, you would find yourself angry at people for no reason. angry at people because of the way things are subtly reported in the world. And, they'll even go back and try, well, this isn't against all Muslims, but there is a radical Islam that's terrifying the nation right now, and we've got to do something to stop them. And it could be your neighbor. Oh, okay, but it's nothing against Muslims. You look at statistic-wise, there's a lot more people that get killed in a car accident, every hour in the country than there is in terrorist attacks by Muslims in the country, But they love to build up this fear because fear is a very powerful emotion, and it's a great motivator to get people to do what they want them to do. But be on guard of that, because the deception is going to grow stronger and stronger. We know this is going to take place, so we have to be on guard. We have to set our minds in advance, knowing that Yahweh has warned us in advance of these very things and has revealed it perfectly to us. But in verse 26, he says, the reason that the temple was destroyed was the fact that they had people in Israel reading and studying the Scriptures, and that was multiplying, and that they just couldn't put down the wonderful knowledge of Yahweh. And this did, and it spread throughout the world, and you can see, it's really an awesome thing to understand or to read about the history, to where, Yahweh actually carried this down to where it would be here for this last day's work. But in verse 35, he says, but this way that they built up what we're seeing today, sitting on the 7 hills of Rome, and what you see being reported. And the Pope, he can run around kissing babies, but that's not the picture. That's the picture of the Catholic Church that they want to get to you. But what you're not getting is the full picture of the Vatican here with the Pope. And that is the full picture of the Vatican is the pharmaceuticals, the ships that carry the bombs, the planes that carry the bombs, the guided missiles. All of these things are controlled by the leader of the kings of the earth. Okay, and as the witness reveals this more and more, it's getting harder and harder for these to cover up their footprints. They're being exposed for who they really are. And it's an awesome thing to behold and to be a part of. And I hope that we will all stay strong and endure and finish this work to the end. But at this time, if you all please stand, I do have the great privilege and honor to turn the services to the great Kohan Levi Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. So we are continuing in the 14th book of Israel, part 1. We are in chapter 13. And again, the title of the sermon is, The Leaders of the Kings of the Earth Are Connected with All Sickness, Disease, Global Warming, and Wars. And anyone who just take a look at the news today could really see that connection between the kings of the earth and what Pastor put there in the title. But continuing on, I'd like to go to verse 39, because Pastor is laying out some of the things that has taken place in history, and then he makes reference to the keys of this blood that was written by Malachi Martin back in 1990. And he says, the only thing I like about the keys of this blood that Malachi Martin never did bring out, I kept thinking he would bring out, this keys of the blood ends in a certain spot. Prophecy shows that it's no longer by blood, and Yeshua was the first of the ending of that keys of this blood. And what takes over now is exactly what Yeshua lived, and that is righteousness. The keys of this righteousness, that's my next book, by the way, The Keys of This Righteousness. And Pastor said he hoped to get it written before the Catholic Church kills itself and out to them. But if you have the book of Yahweh with you, you could look at Hebrews chapter 1, and we'll just read a few verses there. But he shows that Yeshua was the first of the ending of the keys of this blood, or this bloodline that has started off with the Aaronic priest and the sons, Korah and his followers and so forth, and has come down today through not today, but going back in Yeshua's time, through the Herodians, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, and then come down to us today through the Catholic Church. But if you look at Hebrews chapter 1, and let's look at verse 2, we read, has in these last days spoken to us through his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, for whom he made the world. And notice verse 3, who being the reflection of the perfection of Yahweh and the representation of Yahweh's plan, by upholding all things concerning that which was spoken by Yahweh through the law and the prophets, when he had purged sin, sat down on the right hand of Yahweh on high, becoming so much better than the Malachim, he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. Notice verse 8. But to the Son he says, the throne of your Father is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. And this is exactly what Pastor is making note here, that Yeshua lived a righteous life, and he gained this inheritance through righteousness. The position that he occupies right now was acquired by righteousness. Notice verse 9 in Hebrews chapter 1. You love righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore Yahweh your Father has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions, fellow heirs. Of course, he is the firstborn into the kingdom, but you could see that Yeshua loved righteousness and hated iniquity, setting for us the pattern that we have to follow in our daily lives, one of loving the righteousness of Yahweh, loving the laws of Yahweh, and hating the iniquity, the pushing or the rejection or the putting aside of the laws of Yahweh. Notice verse 40 in the book of Israel. But he knew, Malachi Martin knew, that the keys of this blood started back in the days of Moshe. Now, and it was given to Moshe, and it was a priesthood, of course, that Hebrews talks about and shows you that it ended with Yeshua, and that the priests were set up. They had the keys of this blood. They were taken, they were men who, because of their bloodline, their genealogies, which they said that wasn't even correct because people would go to extremes to falsify their genealogy if they had money to do so, like the Herodians. And then he goes into a little bit about the Herodians. But he shows that the Catholic Church, coming down from the days of Moshe, it was just genealogy. It wasn't based upon righteousness. It wasn't based upon upholding all the laws of Yahweh. That's why when you read in, let's turn to Isaiah chapter 43. Just remind ourselves a little bit of some of these prophecies here. But in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 28, he says, therefore I will dissolve the Levitical priesthood and give Jacob to the curse and Yisrayl to reproaches. Well, we know that eventually this Levitical priesthood is going to be dissolved. That's the priesthood that the Catholic Church has brought forward. That's the priesthood that they claim to have the keys to. And that's why when you look at the Catholic Church and you look at the emblem, you usually see that they have keys on it because they know that they are the ones who hold on to these keys. Of course, as Yeshua said, they keep the way to the kingdom shut to many people because of the authority that they have, which was given to them by Satan, as other scriptures show. Well, let's continue on here. Let's look at verse 42. But they finally got to the fact that they could take the scriptures away from the people, and this is what they did. So the ones who became the Catholic Church didn't want people following the scriptures. They didn't want them following the laws of Yahweh. They didn't want them following righteousness. And when the temple stood, the people still wanted to be righteous. They still wanted to keep the laws of Yahweh. And the only way they saw that they could get away from keeping the laws was first to destroy the building, which they did in 70 CE, take everything to Rome, which they did, and then after that, they systematically destroyed anyone who wanted to uphold or keep any of the laws of Yahweh, and then they even took away the scriptures. And this is the point that Pastor is making here. And this is the falling away. They actually forced the scriptures to be removed. The prophets' writings, the apostles' writings, they couldn't change them completely. They wanted to change them completely, but there were too many copies, and they were too scattered out for them to do so. And the way they knew that a copy was correct was there would be several others made of this one. Now remember, back then they didn't have photocopying machines and printing press and stuff like that made copies easily available. Any copy of the scriptures was handwritten, and that took some time. Just imagine, having your book of Yahweh and you have to copy it by hand. How long would that take you? How many years? I think that's something I'll probably do in the kingdom as a hobby, just write out the book of Yahweh by hand. Then I'll have all eternity to do it, and probably get to the end of it also. But they didn't have the modern technology that we had, so they had to make handwritten copies, and there were several of them that was available. That was the purpose of the scribes. They were the ones who were supposed to be copying these scriptures and having it ready and available for the people. But these were all handwritten, but there were several others made of this one. So if this one over here, that the people, the gang, the settlement that made it, if it agreed with this one, several more settlements agreed with this one, we know this one is right. So they compared the copies that they have, and if all the copies agreed, then they know that, okay, this one is right. So the Catholic Church, in changing it, the Vatican, when it was involved, they knew they could be proven wrong. So they had to take the scripture, and they had to twist it and falsify it. And Daniel spoke of it in Daniel 7 when he said, this Roman Catholic Church with its army, the army will stand on its part, and they will take away the daily. That was the daily reading of the law, by the way, set up under Moshe. It had to be read every day in the house of Yahweh. So in order to remove that, they had to remove the scriptures totally, which they did, and they kept them removed for 1,500 years. So for 1,500 years, the people had no access to the scriptures. As a matter of fact, any kind of knowledge that was brought forward to the people at that time came forth from the Catholic priests. And if the Catholic priest said, well, this is what the scripture said, well, that was what the scripture said. The people didn't have any copies for themselves. A lot of the people couldn't read for themselves, so they just had to rely upon what the priest was telling them at that time. Notice verse 44. Now this was the Vatican's doing. They admit to it, and when they finally, after they lost their power from plagues that killed off their cardinals and weakened the church significantly, deadly wound, it was a very deadly wound. It talks about being healed later, but it lessened the power of the Catholic Church, but they still they kept control, and if you notice in the history of your Bible, if you ever read the history of your Bible, if you'll pay attention, the Pope still had to authorize this. Anything that was in print. And if they caught anyone putting out anything that wasn't authorized by the Vatican, they had the sword there to cut off his head. And this history has been brought out in the House of Yahweh, how many people were killed who wanted to copy the scriptures, those who wanted to distribute it to the people. Many of them were put to death and so forth because they didn't want this out. They didn't want the word of Yahweh out, what we know as the word of Yahweh, but they didn't want the scriptures out at that time. Let's go to verse 47. Before we go to verse 47, let's go back to verse 46 here. So in 2 Thessalonians, he says, I'm jumping way ahead, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. Now we plead with you, brothers, concerning the coming of our King, Yahshua Messiah, and our gathering together to him. Now he, the Apostle Shaul, was actually speaking of this work right now, this house of Yahweh, the last days house of Yahweh, and he knew the house of Yahweh was going to be established. He knew there was going to come a great falling away from righteousness, total falling away from righteousness, a great, as he puts in this chapter right here, the great falling away first. Well, this was something that they had to look forward to because Yahshua said, I'm going to send you out like sheep and they're going to kill you. And they did. They slaughtered them by, some historians say, trillions. They slaughtered them by trillions. What got the most attention was Hitler. When they said he killed 6 million Jews, well, he actually killed 6 million Sabbath keepers. And of course, Hitler was not a Sabbath keeper, and most of his crew were Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. They were doing the work of the Catholic Church, and Hitler plainly says that. Let's skip this sentence here. He was killing off the Sabbath keepers or a person who owned a menorah. Now, isn't that something, how they would hate that menorah that much, this 7-lamp lampstand? And of course, Pastor said that if anyone had a 7-lamp lampstand and they saw it in someone's window with the lights on, especially at the beginning of the Sabbath, that raised questions. And of course, the questions would be answered, and then that would start the rumors to go in again about the work of Yahweh, the plan of Yahweh, the 7 works, and so forth. So they were always trying to put this to an end, to stop this message from going out. Let's go all the way to, let's look at verse 51. So we are continuing 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. Now we plead with you, brothers, concerning the coming of our King, Yahshua Messiah, and our gathering together to him. So this is speaking of this time period. As Pastor said before, this is speaking of the last days. Well, right now, if you get it in your mind that this coming, what it actually means, it's not making a personal appearance, but it's coming. He has the power, like Yahweh right now, to where he can actually send inspiration, and of course, it is broadcast. I don't know how, maybe like something like a signal from a radio. It's always amazing to me how you can mash a button on a clicker and it got to be a certain one. You know, and it's easy to identify Yahshua's inspiration. You know, it's really easy. It's easy for us for any of us to know if we are being inspired by Yahshua. Because if we are being inspired by Yahshua, we will follow Yahshua's teachings. You see? So just think about it. If you're being inspired by Yahshua, would you retaliate? If you're being inspired by Yahshua, would you hate your brother? You know, so when you start, we could go down down a long line, a list like that, and you would know whether you're being inspired by Yahshua or not. If you look at the scriptures and you look at what Yahshua taught, because Yahshua's inspiration is not going to get us to go against his teaching. That inspiration is coming from another authority, not from Yahshua though. So Yahshua's inspiration would keep us in unity with his teachings, and Yahshua's inspiration will keep us in unity with the one whom he has sent. It wouldn't put us above the one whom he has sent. It will keep us in unity with him, in submission to him. That's Yahshua's inspiration. That's how we can tell if we are being inspired by Yahshua himself that is coming to us. So this is the time period that is being spoken of. Now in verse 52, well, Yahweh has his ways of reaching us, but before Yahshua, Yahshua spoke to us by the prophets. Now he's coming to us, Yahshua is speaking to us as Hebrews. The very first chapter shows you Yahweh is coming, speaking to us through Yahshua, the high priest over the house of Yahweh, under inspiration, writing in the clouds and so forth, been doing a lot of that. You know, the thing about Yahshua and the inspiration coming to us and the teachings that we have, what Yahshua had to use in his time is what the world would call the Old Testament. Now, this will come as a surprise to many Christians because they think that the New Testament was there and that somehow Yahshua was using the New Testament, but there's no such thing. Yahshua utilized the writings of the laws and the prophets. That's what he used, that's what he taught, that's what he taught from. So there was nothing of volume 2 for him to use to teach from. Neither did his disciples or him or the prophets ever did away with any of the laws of Yahweh. And this is something that is very simple to study out if someone has the patience to do it. I'm speaking to those out in the world who may be listening. If they have the patience to do so, it's something that is very easily proven that Yahshua kept the law, he taught the law, and he taught it to his disciples, and his disciples taught the same thing. None of them came to do away with the laws of Yahweh in any way. As a matter of fact, In the book of Matthew, chapter 5, Yeshua said, don't even think that I've come to do away with this. And yet all Christianity has run away with that thought. Yep, he came and he nailed it to the cross. And Yeshua said, don't even think I came to do this. But let's continue on. But the gathering together, verse 54 here in the book of Yisrayl. But the gathering together, we are gathering from Yeshua speaking to us. We are gathering people unto him, and it's called the House of Yahweh. Now Yeshua said, I will establish my house on unity. I'm going to establish my house on unity. And he said the gates of hell are not going to prevail any longer. They're not going to prevail against this one. They did against the others, and it was given into his hand. Are you getting this? It was given unto his hand to do this. Take all the scriptures away, and a great falling away took place. Falling away from righteousness. I'm speaking of righteousness. So you could make a note of that in your book of Yahweh. This was a falling away from righteousness, from the laws, falling away from the keeping of the laws, because the laws were withdrawn from the people. They couldn't read it, they couldn't study it. They had, many of them just went by what they remembered and so forth. Now in verse 55, it says, you got to know the laws to know what righteousness is, right? Well, they had to take away the laws, and that's what Daniel 7:25 tells you. They take away the laws, take away the prophets, change it. They take away the name Yahweh, then they have the Bible saying, so God said, I will make man in my image, and God made man in his image. Well, no. You look down a little further, and Satan is saying, hey, do this, and you won't be like this God, you will be like the gods. So which God are they talking about? Which one? Is it the one who made the heavens and the earth, or is it the one who Satan is saying, become like? So this is the confusion that you start running into when you use a King James version or any other version that doesn't use the name Yahweh the way the book of Yahweh has it. So continuing on here, he says, which didn't make a lot of sense, but no one ever really spent a lot of time worrying about it until the house of Yahweh was established. And then, of course, the book of Yahweh was brought back. What a blessing this is. Yes, the book of Yahweh is back, and it's here to stay. The Catholic Church will not prevail against this house. You got to remember that. You got to believe it. Now, quickly, anyone, when was the first book of Yahweh published? 1987. That's when the first book of Yahweh was published back in 1987. So think about it. So from the time that the Catholic Church destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, took the book of the law with them, then systematically persecuted anyone who kept the laws of Yahweh. Remember, go back into the lost faith of the apostles, history and prophecy, and you can see the 10 persecutions all the way up until Constantine. He finished off the house of Yahweh at that time, and then from 325, that's when it started bringing forth their false saviors and so forth. That's when Christianity was brought forward. That's when Sunday worship was instituted and etc. And then gradually they started grafting in the pagan festivals. Remember, Christmas wasn't celebrated until the 4th century CE, wasn't given that name until the 9th century CE. The letter J wasn't invented until the 16th century. So you have hundreds and then thousands of years of deception that has been brought forward down to this time until the house of Yahweh was established, and then the book of Yahweh was produced. Now, one of the things that you would, if you ever really look at the book of Yahweh is an excellent work. I mean, it really is. Just reading the scriptures itself. Now, what you find, I was looking up Bible scholars, and if you look it up on the internet, what you'd find is Christian Bible scholars. So that's the first problem that you're going to run into. So if you're looking up into Bible scholars, you're going to find Christian Bible scholars, and you're going to find Christian Bible scholars that are part of the Institutes of Higher Learning. You're going to find Christian Bible scholars who don't believe in what they call the Old Testament, they only believe in the New Testament. You'll find Christian Bible scholars who support Christian doctrine. So if you were to go to any of these Christian Bible scholars and you were to present them with the book of Yahweh, they would disagree with most of what is written in the book of Yahweh simply because they are Christian Bible scholars. They're not Yahweh scholars. They're not Yahweh scholars. And none of them could be Yahweh scholars because they would have to be appointed by Yahweh. They'll have to fulfill certain prophecies that will have to be written about them. And then you take that and you add it to Daniel chapter 12. It says that the wicked will never understand these things. Now, if you're a Christian Bible scholar, you're not righteous. I'm sorry. Being a Christian Bible scholar means that you're not keeping the laws of Yahweh, and you're practicing sin, which makes you wicked, which means you're cut off from Yahweh, which means you wouldn't understand the things that Yahweh has put in the scriptures to be understood. So, when you read the scriptures, when us in the house of Yahweh read the scriptures and we study the scriptures and you come across a particular, the way the book of Yahweh is translated, and you may go to the Christian commentaries, of which there are many, and some of the other scholars and so forth, many times you would find that the verses and the passages is translated a little bit different from what you would find in the King James Version or some of the other versions that are out there. But that don't make the book of Yahweh wrong, because they have something different. Remember what we have just read previously. The Catholic Church couldn't falsify the whole thing. There were too many copies that were already out there, but they twisted some, they changed a little bit here, they changed a little bit there, and etc. And then King James gave the authorized version back in 1611, and that has become the most popular version of the Bible ever. The King James authorized version, but it's not the truth. Even though it was authorized by King James in 1611, it's not the truth. The true scriptures is the book of Yahweh that was published back in 1987. That is the truth. But these are, we have to study this and really understand this, because there are many who oppose what the house of Yahweh is teaching. And there's no reason for us to be afraid or to cower because of they may have letters to their names and they have studied in theology in a seminary and whatever. They're not being led by a man of Yahweh. As a matter of fact, they're being led by the man of sin. So who do you want to be led by? Who do you want to receive your teachings from? The prophet that Yahweh inspired to be bringing forth the words in these last days, or the man of sin that sits on the 7 hills of Rome? Yes, he's the one in the house of Yahweh. But this is something very important to keep in mind, that pastor is a Bible scholar, but not only just a Bible scholar, he is the only authorized scholar of the Bible by Yahweh. The only one authorized by Yahweh, whose authority is spoken of in the scriptures. So, it's the book of Yahweh itself. It's really a tremendous, tremendous work. And there's so many things, and I could go on and on about the book of Yahweh, but I wouldn't get to finish what I need to cover here. So let's continue on. Let's go to verse 58. So we're reading in 1 Thessalonians chapter, let me find my spot here. Yes, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and now we're looking at verse 2. That you not be soon shaken in mind, nor be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as if from us, as that the day of Yahweh is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless there comes a falling away first. Now, at this time right here, when this was being written by the Apostle Shaul, being protected so he could write these things, he had to have time to write them, and he did. Yahweh made sure of it because this had to be written. This message right here, it is for us. It wasn't for them. It's for us today. He was writing about the last generation and the last gathering, and he was telling the brethren that there's going to be this great falling away first, or falling away from righteousness. Remember, as Pastor has covered. So unless there comes a falling away first, and the servant of sin is revealed. Now, you talk about secrecy. The Pharisees, it means secrecy, separatists. They separated themselves so that the people would not know that they married their brothers' wives, that they were living in sodomy, that they were raping children, murdering children. This was going on then. It's the same religion that they have right now. They moved it to another location where they could practice their religion behind closed doors. It's after they branch out into other places and the priests were not so careful that they got to getting caught and charges got to being filed against them, but nothing is done about it. If you notice, they filed charges, but nothing is even done. Nothing is even done. Nothing is ever changed. And this is what you see taking place with the Vatican. You had the whole uproar that came up because of all the child abuse scandals that was coming up and so forth, and then they shuffled around the priests and they paid out millions, sometimes even billions of dollars in payments, but they haven't stopped their practices. They haven't stopped the evil that is being brought forward at this time. So let's continue on let's go to verse 62. But he is going to be revealed. Well, who is going to reveal him? The one who opposes him is written plainly for everyone to see by the prophets. And we know that's Yisrayl Hawkins. He's the one who opposes Babylon and the one who opposes the system. So the Apostle Shaul here is actually saying that this organization is actually going to be exposed. Remember, Yeshua said, if I hadn't have come and spoken to them, they would not have had their sins revealed. But now they have no cloak for their sins. Well, of course not. We're exposing them daily now, yes. And their sins, they're not repenting of sin. As a matter of fact, this present Pope, he doesn't condemn sin. He says, who am I to judge? So there's no condemnation of sin. There's no telling the people to turn away from their sins. As a matter of fact, he's saying you can continue to practice your sins and you'll be accepted by the Catholic Church. Now he says they may be repenting, Pastor says they may be repenting that they got caught for their evil, but they're not going to repent of sin. The gods that they're following, the evil gods that they're following, Satan says, do evil and you'll be like the gods. You won't be like Yahweh. You can't receive eternal life, but you have an eternal soul. Don't worry about it. Let me worry about that. And then she tells the preachers, tell them, go out and just believe. Let me worry about the rest of it. That's Satan. Satan is not worried about your welfare. Satan is not worried about the world's welfare. The only thing she wants to do is to get you destroyed by sickness, disease, by war, by famine, which are already in the works right now. And brothers, when you look out into the world right now, this is exactly what you're seeing. They were talking about the Zika virus, the new one that came up, that they discovered. It's not really new, but it's new in terms of what it's doing, and they're linking it to, the women who are pregnant, if they get bitten by a mosquito and they bring forth a child, and the child may have a smaller brain. They call it microcephaly, and of course live a very short life, and etc. But they're looking at some of these diseases that are spreading. And of course, they said this particular virus is a relative of the dengue fever virus, and it's a milder form of that particular virus. But now they're saying that it's spreading, that it's causing problems, and they haven't studied this virus. They don't know what the possibility of it is, what it could possibly do, and etc. And it's just showing the dangers that we are living in right now in this present world, and we may think of it as a light thing, but how many of us has been bitten by mosquitoes? What is that mosquito carrying in it that is sucking your blood? We have no idea. We have no idea. That's why we have to rely upon Yahweh's protection. That's why we have to rely upon Yahweh's protection, and it's really necessary for us to do the things that Yahweh tells us to do. And it's just as Pastor said earlier on, that the disease and the sickness and the famines is not really getting rid of the population fast enough. So what Satan is looking forward to and what the world is looking forward to are the wars that they're getting ready to bring forth so that it could really decimate the population of the earth very quickly. But brothers, we don't have to worry about these things. Yahweh has given us protection in His house. He has given us the one who has been appointed to bring forth these messages in these last days, the one sent. And if we remain faithful, we are going to inherit all the promises that are spoken of in the Scriptures, and we will see all of these prophecies fulfilled. So may Yahweh bless the understanding.